Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our presentation today. We're going to talk about delivering superior experiences with end-to-end testing and metrics that matter, which sounds kind of technical, but it's actually pretty interesting. My name is Arthur Hicken. I'll be our moderator today. So if you have questions, you can put them in that little box at the right. If you have trouble with lagging or freezing, sometimes just hit refresh on the page, and we've seen that that really can help you out. If you have any questions about issues, etc., please put them in the box there, and we'll get someone to try and help you out. If you've got questions for the speakers, please put them in there. We will handle those at the end, so be patient, but we'll get to you. So with me today, we have Diego Giudice. Diego, I probably always mangle your name, I presume, but welcome. We're glad to have you here today.
No problem.
Diego's an analyst at Forrester, and he's got some pretty fascinating things to talk about. And we also have Roya Montazeri. And hi, Roya, how you doing?
Hello, how are you?
Great, great. So Roya and I have been on a few presentations together, and she's got some real interesting stuff too. So the topics we're going to talk about today is, the fact that if you can measure quality, there's a lot of different pieces that you need to measure, but it can give you a lot better control, help you understand your outcome and optimize your testing. And so you can drive value from your testing and from your quality. So first off, we're going to go with Diego, and the rest of us turn our cameras off so that we can minimize issues here. Diego, thanks.
Thank you very much, Arthur. And yeah, it's a pleasure for me to be on this call with you and Roya. Well, I only have 20 minutes, I believe. So let me dive into this very quickly so that we can hear also what Roya has to say with her great case study that she's going to be talking about. We kind of keep ignoring the fact, or we kind of don't have this sensitivity about the fact that quality is now an executive concern. And we can all understand why, right? I mean, software is the business and is the expression of business. And so we're writing more and more software. And when that software is not working, the business is not working. And you can see these are small excerpts out of filings, executive filing documents of these large organizations. And you can see that they really all talk about the fact that if the products and the technology are not working, our business could be materially adverse. That's what United Healthcare says. But it's just I'm trying to kind of focus the attention on the fact that today, quality is a major concern in any business. At the same time, we have the issue that there is, we're adapting continuously to change, and quality becomes with the new pace of going really fast as organizations to adapt to change. There's this risk that, are we still keeping enough attention on quality? And so, it's becoming even more a challenge of going fast, but at the same time, keeping and increasing focus on quality. And keeping quality in a world where everything is connected, and if you have a problem here, it will probably be reflected over there. And with customer journeys that are more and more end to end, we are automating customer journeys where a customer will start interacting with systems from the very beginning when they're looking for a product or a service. Then they find the service, they buy the service, they start working with the service, and it kind of traverses different systems, and these systems might be even running on different clouds. So the level of digital employee experience is just becoming broader and more comprehensive, and therefore getting quality right at all those at that enterprise level is even becoming more of a challenge. And And really the point I'm trying to make is that change, the best thing an organization can do today is be ready for change, is to be able to pivot quickly when there is change coming, and so that we don't get overrun by change, but we can manage change. And of course, I think lessons learned with everything that's happening in the world in these past few years, from pandemics to wars close by, which are impacting the way businesses, pivoting businesses, and being adaptive is what we think in Forrester. For any organization, being future fit to change means being adaptive and being able to adapt to whatever is coming behind the corner, even if it's unknown. Now, organizations have been adaptive, are becoming more adaptive by not only by embracing what I would call, agile and DevOps. Of course, there's many other things that we're doing to become future fit and adaptive, but specifically, I would say Agile plus DevOps in the last 5 to 10 years have becoming a very important part of any organization becoming more adaptive. And of course, Agile and DevOps are two sides of the same coin at the end. You need both of them to bring that end-to-end agility, business agility that your business needs and wants. And the reason why I'm raising this is because, guess what? This has completely changed and revolutionized the way we test. Testing is right in the middle of this. Any transformation that you're going through, becoming, building software faster and better, testing is kind of is a first-class citizen in making that change. And so this means, and what we've seen is that basically that end-to-end testing that I just mentioned a minute ago is happening in every industry, really, as we saw, right? Be it automotive, be it government, or be it manufacturing or financial services. And end-to-end testing requires quite a few things that we need to do, more than we used to do, from integration testing in that complex enterprise landscape, to doing also lots of testing at the UI level, and be it a mobile, be it web, be it whatever else, an IoT or other types of devices. But we also need to test going beyond the user interface because of the complexity that we're bringing in with the modern ways of building software through microservices, containers, and on the cloud, as I mentioned, and therefore API testing becomes a crucial part of that journey of end-to-end testing. And because we've got this connected world where you might not have all the services available to you when you're building something new and you want to test against a third-party service, for example, or a service that might be sitting on a mainframe, we need to kind of create this software simulations quickly and easily and cheaply, right? Not building to simulate the world that we are, the context that we are in, building that new software component, not by replicating or duplicating everything and testing it out, but actually doing it with software, with technology that we call service virtualization, and in order to kind of make and simulate these complex scenarios and be able to succeed with end-to-end testing, and all the way to doing more and more, we're automating more business processes, right, with RPA, with the low-code tools, and that testing needs to be done too. And last but not least is not just automating and testing functionality across this, supporting the end-to-end journey of any customer, but also the non-functional side of it, right? Is performance, do we have the right performance? If we get a high level of concurrency, can the application support that? So testing at scale. And so that's why I would say we've gone from the traditional way of testing into what I call the modernization of testing, and it's really what we call continuous testing. And so this new world of testing means that we have to come with new practice. It comes with new practices. It comes with new ways of organizing teams embedding testers into teams, for example, and not just having a test center of excellence sitting in an ivory tower, federating testing in that organization. It means using common new metrics. It means coming with new technology, right? That helps us focus more on automation, that helps us test APIs and continuous integration and continuous delivery, provisioning test environments quickly and continuously. But also what we're seeing is that with AI and machine learning now becoming more of a consumable technology, testing is also being infused with AI and machine learning to be able to test even smarter. And last but not least, these are a couple of things that we're seeing, you know, that Roy's example emphasizes a lot, is the use of API testing and service virtualization testing, which kind of goes hand to hand, right? There's some new technologies, and this new world of this new connected world needs this virtualized approach to testing that we kind of haven't been focusing. We didn't focus that much years back, and is becoming more of a center of gravity going forward for this modern technology, part of this modern technology foundation. Now, let's focus on the topic of today, which is more around the common metrics, right? And that you can see that was point number 7 in that in the 12 must-dos of continuous testing that I was just talking about. I've been doing research on metrics for quite some time in Forrester, and broadly speaking, around the metrics needed for modern development, for agile and DevOps. And in 2016, I came up with a framework which was made of really 4 clusters. Business value, right? Measuring things like net promoter score or sales increase. What's the business impact of what we're delivering? Together with quality, of course, right? Quality being pre-production metrics, but also production metrics. Production metrics in these last 10 years have always been, you know, nobody has kind of abandoned production metrics, and but actually that's always been one of the top quality metrics that organizations want to measure, because business is very sensitive about quality and what happens into production. Progress type of metrics to kind of measure, are we, you know, progressing? Are we improving? Improvement, process improvement, and the way we build and test software has always been, and you know, has been something that we've been that enterprises want to focus on lately. And last but not least, efficiency, of course, right? I mean, that's what we were all focusing on mostly, I would say, in years back before Agile and DevOps came around. You know, how many lines of code are we able to deliver and produce, and or even function points? And today, really, it's, well, it doesn't really matter how many lines of code we're delivering if we're not delivering the right value. And so this framework in the research I did in 2021 became a bit more articulated, which it basically emphasized the center, right? The focus around business value becoming not just one of 4 categories of metrics, of clusters of metrics, but the cluster of metrics that focuses on outcomes, so that we can measure our outcomes of value to customers. Are we delivering software that matters for our business users, for our clients, end user clients? And quality, which is, are we doing the right things? Or efficiency, are we cost effective? Or progress, are we improving the way we build software? We added this 5th element and cluster of engagement. Is culture changing? What is the employee experience? Because we know that if the employee experience is great, we have a better customer experience. You know, it has a ripple effect on customer experience. And so basically what this new framework says is that we have this business value outcome metric, which is central to the way we build new software. And then you've got leading metrics into it. In other words, you can't have business value if you don't have the right quality, right? Or if you don't have, or if you're not effective in and fast enough in delivering that business value. And if your employees are not engaging, and if you're not improving, right? You're learning and improving what you build and you deliver. And so basically, the clusters are those. what I'm seeing doing is leading organizations are creating these dashboards where these metrics are, you don't just focus on one single metric, solo metric, without having it connected to other metrics as well. And so the ideal, because, basically it doesn't matter if the efficiency, if the delivery is really fast, if you've got lots of quality issues, and therefore the experience on business value will be very poor. And so the dashboard kind of gives leaders this view of what's, really being able to manage the focus of what delivery, of how effective delivery is being, if it's delivering business value. And here are some examples of course, the metric types in all those clusters that you can read by yourself. But if you look at quality things in like, post-production metrics and response time and security and deployment failures, or efficiency, which touches on throughput, productivity, flow metrics that are becoming more and more important, net promoter score or sales revenue, customer onboarding, it depends the level of sophistication you can get for business value. And then, progress like rework trends, test automation, is that improving? And finally, last but not least, engagement, like cultural change, developer experience, the way we build. I'm seeing people measuring developer experience, for example, is through mood marbles, like red, yellow, green. And engagement has become important, especially through the pandemic, because now not everybody's sitting in an office. We're all working from home, still working from home. We will continue to work from home, right? We're going into this hybrid models, and therefore measuring engagement becomes more and more important. And so that correlation, what's important is the correlation of those metrics, right? So you want to correlate quality to business value, right? So the metrics that you would measure for quality, like leading expect defects into production with high severity, those are the ones you want to make sure you want to really decrease. You want to have an SLA that says, well, maybe I don't want more than X numbers of these type of defects in my production system. And so basically that correlation of metrics, of leading metrics and outcome metrics, become very important. So there's a few more things we learned, and I learned in that research I did around these metrics. So besides the metric or the type of metric that you're going to be using, which you will correlate eventually to even, goals of your organization, or today people use objective key results. But there's 7 kind of interesting tips I would like to leave you with before I hand it over to Roy. One is, you really have to tailor the type. So, this is not about having a sea of metrics, because that can be very confusing, and they might not really, and you might not even know what to do with them. And it's expensive to measure metrics, manage the process of measurement. So you want to focus them on specific objective key results that you have, that your division will have, your team will have. And so tailor the metrics to your objective key results. If your key results are about, we need to increase sales in a certain region, or maybe I need to test the products in that region that are we delivering business value fast enough? Second point is, don't measure, measuring product quality is paramount. That's all about, we're talking about today, but also measure team health, measure the engagement, because if your team is if the team health is poor, the results will also be poorer. And so measuring, it's not just about measuring quality, but it's also measuring metrics at the team level and not just at the individual level, where I think leaders understand that measuring, benchmarking individual metrics, like how performant is a certain developer in terms of how many lines of code they've written, doesn't really help. But what helps the developer is going to be, can I, do I have visibility on how fast my teammates are, for example, checking code in? How frequently are others checking code in? And I can compare it to the frequency of my check-in frequency. And if it's there's a difference, maybe I can go talk to my colleague and say, well, what are you doing different from what I'm doing in order to be able to, to improve the way I work? So we're not, the modern way of dealing with metrics is not about individual benchmarks and sharing those and having managers control individuals. It's about measuring eventually the performance of the team, how the team is doing, the health of the team. But privately at the individual level, you might be able to, the tools actually give, the different tools that the team is using might give that visibility to privately to each individual to kind of benchmark itself against the others. And that's the only reason why eventually individual metrics might be useful. Use digital pulse metrics to monitor engagement. Well, I mentioned engagement a minute ago. How do you measure engagement? Well, there's some tools that are very, very interested. The tools that offer, tools themselves offering visibility into the frequency, as I mentioned, for example, of checking code, or the level of automation that a certain, team might have reached, and the frequency by which people might not only check in code, but the participation into the team meetings, to the stand-up meetings, and so forth. So monitoring engagement is also becoming important, and there are interesting tools that can help you do that. Digital tools that help your teams do that and correlate. And the other thing is, you do have, you might say, well, there's a lot of data that I can actually download from my CI/CD tools, from the test automation tools, from the test management tools. What do I do with all this data? Well, actually, you can run analytics on them. And even if you have this sea of data, guess what? You can get some interesting insights out of them. And those insights can really come, can help you decide, well, what to test next, maybe, or which automation should I be focusing on next to optimize my testing performance. And last but not, actually, this is the number 6 one is, so today, in applying and modernizing development and testing, organizations are kind of doing that in an iterative way, focusing on specific areas that make sense. And then when you've learned how to do things better in that area, you want to move to the next one. And what is that area? We call them value streams, right? The people, the process, and the technology from a business perspective that we can focus on. We can improve how we've improved, how we've improved the process that we're using for building and testing, and measuring basically the flow within that value stream of how many epics have we processed in that value stream, and what's the level of quality, and basically measuring the flow through the value stream is becoming more and more important, and it's becoming a big topic. And you need to make quality part of that value stream one of the important key metrics in measuring how performing we're being in a value stream. And then last but not least is, remember, the key focus should always be on business value as an outcome metric. You've got important leading metrics into the business value, and quality is obviously one of them. But at the end of the day, if we don't deliver business value, really we're not helping the business. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Roy or Arthur. I don't know who's going to pick the ball up, but thanks very much.
Diego. Very interesting. And again, if you have questions for Diego, please put them in the box and we'll handle them at the end. And with that, Roya is here from Cox Automotive to talk about, some actual issues that they addressed and how they address them and how they improve quality in a pretty difficult environment. So, Roya?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and hear Diego. I want to build up on what Diego noted. And today's market is fast, constant changes, and everybody wants to increase quality. And really, what I'm going to talk today is now no different than what really Diego noted, that we need to be adaptive and we need to figure out how to become adaptive. Before I start, I wanted to start by talking about our company. A little bit about Cox Automotive. We are a company that has many, many different divisions that actually service all about automotive. So you may have seen Kelley Blue Book or have interacted with Kelley Blue Book for valuation of your car. If you want to sell or you want to buy a car, you may access Kelley Blue Book. But as you can see here, our landscape is vast. I personally work on a dealer track division of Cox Automotive. And by just looking at this, you can guess how much data, how much integration. And again, it's a full life cycle of automotive industry in a way. When it comes to my work in particular and my division, our work is in a truly finance technology type of division. Basically, DealerTrack works with dealer and lenders and financing part of automotive lifecycle. As you can see on the screen, we actually facilitate digital retailing. We facilitate application processing, contract processing, all the way to when a person goes in and gets a title for their cars. So it's a lot of interaction between different systems that makes the flow. Again, go back to the business value. We are actually creating a business value for car shopping experience and basically streamlining all the different stage of this process across these different endpoints and integration that makes it easy for you as a car buyer, for dealer as a seller, and for lenders as the people who provide the finance, make it easy for all of them to make the transaction. So at the end of the day, the part of the work that I support from a quality perspective within DealerTrack has to do with transactional system. And our uptime is very important because that's what brings the business value. If you look at it, we actually put virtualization in a place that matters, in a place that tests the flows, not a specific component. And as you can see, is across we have different layers, but we are making sure that we place the virtualization in a place that creates that end-to-end flow experience. And more will come into that service virtualization and our configurations. Now, let me tell you a little bit about our challenge. And again, going back to what Diego was talking about, being adaptive means that you understand your current as-is state. So when we started this endeavor, really, if you look at on the top part, our platform contains many servers, many different network layers. This is the hard gear that we build our application on top of it. And it's complex. It is, and any modern technology, and again, this is a technology that we have both new and old legacy. Any modern technology, even in cloud, consists of many different layers. For us, the challenge was this was in-house and it had many layers, some of which was not clearly known or documented because agile processes came after the platform was built. We also had data flows and have data flows, very complex. And these data flows, again, partially were documented for our legacy system. And we had many of those data flows that were not clearly defined, and hard to find out where in data flow something may go wrong from system to system, from endpoint to endpoint. We certainly had processes on a scale of, we knew how our client services work, we knew how our development services work. We had foundational processes, but how those processes were informed or were used as part of full development cycle, those were not clearly identified at the time that the challenge of quality got started. And we did have a test automation framework. We used Selenium for UI testing, and we did have regression automation testing, but they weren't end-to-end within the component, mostly within the specific piece of the product. And our application by no means are simple. They have many decision flows, and they had quite a number of decisions to be made within application itself that needed to be tested. And again, integrated across. And if you look at it, while we had all the pieces, the right pieces in place, what was missing was that end-to-end flow. So imagine at the time we were also doing some uplifting of our application. We were building our new framework for our application. Application was getting facelift, but if the foundational pieces that I just talked about are not chained together correctly and uplifted in the same manner, we wouldn't go anywhere. It would have been like that highway that half of it is broken. And your application is going fast, but it just doesn't get to the end. Or it has a lot of bumps on the road. So our challenge was stated as a quality problem, but the quality problem was in many different layers. And it was that recognition that we needed to do to figure out what do we need to do next. So we started having really intentional focus on what do we want to measure. And again, if a measurement is not going to deliver that business value, then it won't get us to what we need to do for our clients. For us, our complaint was quality complaint. Clients were having too many incidents, as simple as that. And those incidents eventually from a business would cause churn, would cause you would lose a client. So we want to remove the churn, and we wanted to do that at the quality level for a specific department. We put a 5% month-to-month decrease for a state defect, very specific. And we intentionally put one, not many. Like we wanted to make sure we get to the level of maturity that we need to get to before we bring other matrices in for measurement. Along with that, we started focusing on three areas. Like I said, we want to think about application flow, end-to-end testing, non-functional testing, and performance testing. Some of flavor of all of these were existed in our organization, but not in a way that we could execute consistently against them. Or we created a central COE that actually started looking at how do we know that we are consistent across all of these, whether it's our epic, our features. We did have agile too. How do we make sure that done criteria is consistent? That COE team took that initiative along with a whole bunch of test management, release management, or maintenance methodology. All of those become part of that COE. And then most importantly, my today's focus is automation. Like I said, we had automation, but we weren't doing end-to-end. We had some mimicking of some of the responses in some of our components, but we needed service virtualization to really establish the end-to-end flow testing and some test data management. We did have a test data bank homegrown, but we needed to put around it some type of requirements, some type of validation. So our test data management system actually can feed into what we require as an end-to-end test flow scenario done criteria. And then we really, really focus also on more synthetic and alerting so that we can actually react to whatever change cause whatever problem. So we started putting these pieces together, and we started actually focusing on a specific and measuring the specific. Now I want to talk a little bit, focus on service virtualization, the audience for this talk. So for us to select this service virtualization, we wanted to make sure that we have a small POC, but that POC, what needed to be really a specific problem that we had at the time. Our journey started in Q4 of 2019. We actually reached out, testing what is not and never is in our organization outside the Scrum team. So we actually reached out to a Scrum team, and we start talking about what is the major pain point and what do we want to implement as that one use case, one scenario that can bring the most value. As simple as it could be, it was a missing piece in our end-to-end flow that we identified. And we actually said, we're going to work directly with Parasoft to install, implement, and actually create this asset, this virtual asset. To this day, this virtual asset through POC still is being used. So that was the first thing we did. By end of Q4, we had our first asset, and we actually were hitting that first asset to do the end-to-end testing for that one flow. And that was, frankly, brought that level of understanding of how virtual asset can help us to look at our scenarios and see how ready we are before we go to production. The other item that on Q4 got clear, really become clear for us, is that we need to have trainings. Our investment is on the asset itself, not just purchasing the tool. So we started working by having SME, subject matter expert, from each of the product and a Scrum team to start getting training. Originally, we started with 2. Those past helped us make the training available to us. And those 2 really become SME for Parasoft. And then we started interaction. the shift left approach to start saying, what trainings does a Scrum team need? What training do they need to define what type of virtual asset do they need in order for their flows to be supported? We also started thinking by end of 2020, so how do we know? Now we have more asset. By all means, we are still shift right. Still is the point where the scenario come together. But by end of 2020, we wanted to know, okay, how is this virtual asset being used? How do I guarantee that it's bringing value? So we start actually looking at how many times hit, what was found, how or what, where else these virtual assets are being used. And one of the things that we found out, our implementation team, we have different environment. We have development, we have QA, we have staging, UAT. For each of these environments, we wanted to make sure we understand how is this asset being used. But we also found out in our UAT, user environment, our implementation team actually is using these assets that we create. If it's new feature function that we want to put in front of our client, these are used for demo, and they are actually using these assets to put some new functionality out where our endpoint may not be ready, the live endpoint may not be ready to be integrated, but these virtual assets are ready and they are being used as part of demos. So by measuring all these activities, we actually start looking at what is the business value we are creating. And in 2021, we more and more started focusing on shift left. How can we get, as part of our feature, as part of our stories, as part of epics, whatever area or how big is the project, to figure out how we can early on our development to start creating these virtual assets. And we are all the way into the degree where we are actually creating these virtual assets earlier in a cycle. And we ask those questions. What do you need in order for you to be able to do end-to-end scenario testing? And really at this moment, we are also looking at, okay, how many defects we are finding through using these virtual assets. Defect is not the only measure, because these assets for us are so important today that if something goes down, we don't have a confidence to release. If the virtual assets or Parasoft in this case goes down, we don't have a confidence to release to production. So these assets are part of our regular development cycle now. And we are actually using them to decide whether a release will happen or not. And I'm going to add a story here. When we had a 0-day security issue, which all of you may have heard of, we needed Parasoft to act as fast with us for 0-day vulnerability for Log4j. And they were our partner. We couldn't release anything without getting them to come in and help us to fix the 0-day vulnerability so that our asset continues to run. So really, by today in 2022, our virtual assets are as important as our code, because we need to make sure these assets can provide to the end-to-end quality that we expect for any of the scenarios we are running. Now I want to give you a little bit of why Parasoft, which I actually gave you one, being a partner and making sure that their uptime and our uptime is hand to hand. We could not or cannot investing in an asset or in a piece of technology where the partner or provider does not have a strong roadmap to support us. So we did have, for any vendor, we do have a lot of criteria that we look at. But most importantly, our investment is in the asset, and we wanted to make sure by partnering with Parasoft, actually we have visibility to their roadmap, and they have a continuous improvement in their product, which they do, that can help us together, for us for a long run to enjoy the asset we provide, and for them to help us to get to the new upcoming technology that they are providing to make the testing easier for us. I added here a screenshot of our product, and as you can see, we created a framework. We said for you to have a virtualized, for anybody, a Scrum team, to have a virtualized asset, a test flow needs to be defined. And you can build it once, but use it in any environment. Because through a logic, by using Parasoft functionality, we can actually change our endpoints and allow to serve the same virtual asset multiple different environments for many different flows. And so we have a test flow, we have an environment agnostic approach that with help of Parasoft we set up. And then you can see here, you can see 3 virtual assets on top of the screen that acts like a lender. And then we put one that actually we are not hitting, which is the real one. In general, this type of approach allows our teams, no matter which environment they are in, to test the same way. So it brought the consistency for us. And then always at the end of the year, we ask ourselves, did we accomplish our mission? Our escape defect really has decreased less than 5%, especially for any component, any product that's part of this endeavor. They all less than 5%. We actually are right now talking about changing our KPI because we wanted to actually measure what matters. So we are changing our KPIs and we are using other KPIs that brings different business value and actually continues to support the quality model that we put into place. We are truly less than 5% on escape defect. Our urgent defect, this is additional piece that we are measuring. Urgent meaning that is really, you have to fix it, is less than 7 days. Really, for many products, is within the day. And then our uptime is 99.97, which is the measurement that we use. I want to talk about uptime a little bit. Our uptime has to do with also availability of our partners and other integration points. And this year, we actually are putting more strength on, we make it harder for ourselves to be able to be proactively looking for any partner's downtime. And that with those calculations, we actually making the quality bar a little bit higher for ourselves. So our availability time today is 99.97. We are looking to even actually more and more harden this availability timeline. With that, I want to thank you for giving me the time. All yours.
All right, thanks. Let's look at some of these questions. Looks like we have a few questions here. So let's see if I switch us back to the other. We learned about the importance of end-to-end testing and some interesting metrics. We have metrics here, both like what Roya is using in a very practical sense, and Diego's got some really interesting research as well on things that the business can do to measure and try to gather together in a dashboard. So I encourage you to look at both of them and try to learn what's important to you. We do have a few assets that you can pick up here today from, just look at the QR code if you want, and you can find out more information. Also, obviously slides and the recording will be available to you. So we will let you know in the next day or two with an email exactly how to get that. So there was a couple of pretty interesting questions, and Diego, I'll go ahead and read it so that everyone can grab it. But they said, early in the comments, you mentioned there's an increasing focus on continuous improvement and by default DevOps. How does this affect Agile? Do you see this paradigm shift towards CI DevOps supplanting Agile or becoming complementary to Agile in terms of concepts that organizations should integrate into their existing Agile environments?
Yeah, so no, I think Agile never goes away. I mean, the manifesto, the manifesto is all about values and principles, right? So Agile is really a change framework. And I still recommend all Forrester clients when I have inquiries, that should be their starting point. Even if they're on a journey 5 years, they should review the manifesto and make sure that there is, that those values and principles are somewhat represented in their strategy going forward. So it's very important. So continuous integration and continuous delivery is a practice that you need, you need the culture change in order to work in a different way. So really the manifesto, compliance to the manifesto is very important. It never goes away. It doesn't matter if we use other, scaling frameworks like SAFe or the Spotify model, the way we organize, but the values and the practices of Agile should always be in an organization, I would say. And guess what? That's the hardest part. I'm about to deliver the new Agile State of the Market 2022 research, and still the number among the top 3 challenges that organizations still have is that cultural and behavioral change. And what is it that can help you, can drive your cultural change? It is the values and the principles of the manifesto at the end of the day.
Yeah, and a little car warranty. We all get those calls these days. Yeah, I feel like the manifestos. Yeah, it's almost a framework, if you will, right? Like it's that culture, and I don't think we're replacing it. I think it'll evolve and change over time. Yeah, maybe someday, but
well, I mean, you know what? I was just invited to review. There's something that is coming up also in the industry, which is the Agile Contract Manifesto. So again, those values and principles are just being introduced also into other areas. But if you look at them very carefully, I mean, it doesn't really matter what's going on. They're still very valid. They still can drive your culture and organization, and you can. And so there's something that we need to build on and not replace, or nothing is going to replace them, in my opinion. At least maybe it can evolve, as you say. Maybe we can come up with more cooler ideas going forward. But so far, I think they do still a pretty good job.
yeah, thanks. Roya, there was another question similar for you. In practicing Agile, has the organization remained true to the manifesto, Scrum Guide, etc., or are you finding it more beneficial to augment Agile with other processes, tools, frameworks, etc.?
So definitely we are true to Agile Manifesto, which is the cultural aspect. You own it, you build it, you run it, right? That piece we are staying true to it. But because of size of our product, being enterprise product, and I just said at the beginning how complex our environment is, we are actually building our entire practice as a scaled Agile framework, safe basically. And in that, we have my team in particular became the part of system team, the place where you actually implement to the market. And again, we are, I don't see us not being agile. In fact, as we are moving more and more of our component to cloud, we are more and more on DevOps, CI/CD, the whole 9 yards, and it's not going to go anywhere. It's just that how do we adopt to make sure that all these integration points and a system level is around it and is being governed correctly. So we the only difference, I would say, we are safe agile.
Excellent. So there was one other one, Roy, that just occurred to me when I look at the complexity of your system and see that you're relying on other vendor services to be up, as you mentioned when you were talking about measuring uptime, and you set about to have this, this KPI around reducing downtime, for example. Do you feel like you could have gotten there as fast without service virtualization? Like, how important was that to your journey?
Very important. This is where we guarantee that our flow, like anybody who does any API testing, we want to make sure that our payloads are match the requirement of the lenders that have requirement for us. By using the virtualization, we actually test all the integration requirement against the payload. At least we try. We may not be in 100% maturity. I want to be really transparent. There are places where we think we did, and there is something in payload is not working, or the request is not working, but at least we find it beforehand. There are sometimes, because of the environment changes that we have, that we sometimes find issues that are hard to solve in those integration. But to answer your question, virtualization helps us in that area. We wouldn't be able to do it without it.
Excellent. Well, thanks. I want to give you both a chance to do a quick summation. Roya, why don't you go first? What's your high point for us here? What do we need to know the most?
I think you need to know that changes are coming whether you like it or not. But a smart testing has to do with a smart thinking about what do you want to add when. So think very hard, who do you want to add? When do you want to add what do you want to add to your stack, and why? And once you make that decision, stick with it, because it's not just about selection of the vendor, it's about your investment.
All right. Thanks, Roy. Appreciate having you here with us today. Diego, a pleasure as always. Any words of wisdom for us here?
I guess, you can't manage what you don't measure. So measure the right things and you'll be more successful in what you want to manage.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Again, we'll send out links about the video so you can watch it and share it with your friends. And if you have topics you want to hear about, certainly let us know. And I encourage you to go look at some of this research as well that Diego's mentioned, that is pretty fascinating stuff. So with that, thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.